Welcome to the Upside Down, a space where the outer world brushes up against the inner world, where the messy and the meaningful meet, and where even in the turning we might discover that upside down can still be its own kind of right side up. Today's story is called The River and I. It's about a reflection and renewal, about what happens when we're invited to see ourselves clearly through the moving waters of change. It's a creative writing story, a fable, part reflection about lost resilience and quiet alchemy of becoming whole. It's an original piece of mine and is symbolic of breaking, healing, and returning to love. So take a breath with me and let the noise fall away. And together, let's step in to The River and I. A foot along the path sets gently down, light as that of a deer. The forest floor bends beneath her heels as she glides along the worn pathway. Hard-pressed dirt and crumbled leaves mold to the soles of her feet as she makes her way through the dense wood. Her eyes fix on the flicker of distant flame and the sounds that follow battle. Whispers of people tending to one another's wounds. Exhaustion drips from her bones. Weariness seeps through the pores of her skin. Warrior sweat and blood drench what once was the finest linen, hand sewn from flax grown along the bend of the river. She had never seen a battle like this. Intense, immense. Objects, bodies, and spit flew through the air as chaos reigned. It is over, she quietly cries, reminding herself that she is no longer fighting for her life. Her mind knows this is true, yet her body remains trapped, rehearsing the events again and again. Trying to place who, what, where, and most painfully, why. A cry escapes her as the memory surges back, taking revenge by pulling her into its depths once more. Retracing the steps and blows she longs to forget, her body insists on unwinding itself in its own time. For now, it has her in its grasp, rewinding her back to the terror, the wounds. She could only lift her eyes for a second before instinct swept through her, wild and electric, igniting every cell like fire racing through dry timber. A life force so fierce it moved her body on its own, whispering to her limbs to make haste before object after object, fist after fist, slammed into the edge of her awareness. Some of the blows landed blunt and uninvited on places her body had not braced for. Their intention left a mark. Swallowing the urge to cry out, she pressed the pain back inside, saving it for later. For the next round. The one that, if they had their way, would leave her on the side of the pearly gates where the golden walkways shimmer with iridescence. Her eyes darted toward the falling tower, where stone and timber crumbled in flame, reducing what had once been her refuge to rubble. Exhaustion settled over her like a heavy blanket. The longing to drag her weary bones to safety became the fuel that kept her body moving, meeting every blow with fire and fury. She anchored herself to the present, focusing on the rhythm of battle, the direction of each strike, the sound of air splitting as fists and debris passed by. Blood-mixed sweat flung from her face as she shook herself into wakefulness. And still, Even in the midst of terror, her mind flickered with fondness. She remembered that tower, the view from its height, how she could scan for signs of danger, how safe she once felt there. The thought pierced her. How did I miss this? How could I not see the signs? How could I be so unprepared? She knew she would have met the pearly gates had her feet not failed her. Falling to the ground, her body drenched and her hair clinging to blood-stained cheeks, she lifted her head slightly and gasped, her eyes drawn to a figure moving toward her. The warrior facing her was taller by feet, not inches, broad-shouldered, with forearms like tree trunks, their skin marked by black ink faded with age, signatures of a life they wanted to remember. The tattoos curled around their wrists and climbed upward, leaving a crossed sinew and scar. Their shoulders were as wide as the doorframe where she once found refuge and warmth at night, dangling her feet from a chair while sipping tea. Electric instincts flooded her body, drawing her into a warrior's stance, but it was too late to defend. Her eyes widened as air left her lungs. This monstrous warrior's shoulder slammed into her, sending her body into the air, lifting, suspending for what felt like minutes. The distance between them stretched as the force of the blow sent her flying backward, and for a split second, their eyes met. They looked familiar. Those hazel eyes, brown, green, and soft once, belonging to someone she had known before. Time seemed to stand still as the memory hurled her backward toward the earth. They had met at the bend of the river, where the flax field matured. She tended the shrubs daily, offering kindness and gratitude for the robes and dresses they would one day become. She loved it there. The smell of fresh water, the fragrance alive and healing, winding its way through her lungs like a prayer. Some, in her tower, called it living water. One early morning, she sat beneath a willow tree near the water's edge, sipping from a pottery cup shaped by a local potter whose hands knew her grip by heart. The glaze shimmered from emerald to turquoise, reflecting both the forest and the shallows of the river. It was in that quiet moment of sipping and pondering that the hazel eyes appeared. They talked for hours, trading stories and beliefs, laughing and wiping one another's tears as they shared their losses, triumphs, and small joys. Their affection was familial. His questions were kind, his curiosity unending, their words intertwined, pulling at the threads of faith, sovereignty, and meaning. She found herself aflame with thought, ideas spilling from her too quickly to catch. She loved the thrill of it. One day the rhythm changed. Hazel eyes dismissed her mid-sentence, slicing the air with a careless hand. What once had been an exchange of hearts became a silence, sharp enough to wound. With clenched fists and unbridled anger, he lashed out, his words striking harder than any weapon. In a flash, he was gone, turning his back and leaving her words to fall against his spine as he disappeared around the river bend. The betrayal echoed in her bones. Its weight pressed her down until she could barely rise from her bed. Each sound outside her window sent her running to the light, scanning for signs of return. But Hazel's eyes never came back. His absence carved into her nerves like fire, wrapping grief and rage around her like a shroud. Now, as she flew through the air, hurled by the force of his blow, memories tore themselves from her body. Images of the past spun wildly, centrifugal, consuming. The sounds of battle roared, clashing metal, splintering wood, human cries. Her breath caught, her lungs begged for air. The ground met her body with a crack that echoed in her ears. Pain surged, sharp, immediate. Before she gasped and forced breath back into her chest, her eyes opened wide, filled with an adrenaline and disbelief, just in time to see Hazel's eyes leaping toward her. In one swift motion, The blur of battle, the spinning memories, the vision of her tower collapsing, all closed around her. The air grew heavy, the ground pulled her in, and darkness swept over her body. Her awareness drifted toward the luminous clouds, and she was alone. A blur of an incandescent light flitted across her vision. Her tongue swept the line of her upper lip, pulling in the taste of earth and blood. Instinct jolted her through her, lightning quick as she twisted her body, commanding her arms and legs to move away from the heavy thud that landed nearby. Flipping and twisting, she struggled to find her footing. The ground was too soft, or perhaps it wasn't beneath her at all. The will to move toward the crumbling tower rose from deep within her, instinctual, like a child running into the arms of its mother. But instead of soil beneath her palms, her hands met the smooth planks of a pine floor. She was no longer in battle, not on the earth where she had fought and fallen. Her vision blurred, a voice, not her own, broke through the haze, gentle and steady. Hands, many hands, moved over her body. One cupped her cheek, another smoothed her brow, while others steadied her leg and held her hand with quiet assurance. "Breathe," someone whispered. "You're safe now." And though her mind could not yet grasp the meaning, her body began to understand. The tension slowly uncoiled. The fight left her muscles, allowing herself to surrender. She drifted into the dense darkness, carried by the sound of soft voices and careful hands. It was months later when she finally made her way back to what had once been home. Moving required the aid of crutches, an intrusion she resented, though she was grateful for them. The healers had warned her to avoid pressure. The bones of her foot were broken, yet she was alive. Her heart still beat, her breath still came, and for that she gave thanks. Walking was slow. Each swing of the crutches taught her patience, forced her head downward toward the earth she had once taken for granted. She could no longer walk lost in thought or gaze at the clouds. Her foot demanded purpose, her body demanded presence. She laughed at herself one morning, wobbling along the path. "Good thing no one's here to see this," she whispered. The linen beneath her arms was wrapped in twine, makeshift padding meant to ease the chafing. It wasn't elegant, but it did the job. Each day brought her one swing closer to the tower. The others called it a miracle that she had survived it all, and perhaps it was, but for her the miracle was quieter, the simple act of healing, the permission to rest. For the first time, she allowed herself to tend to her own exhaustion, to cradle the weariness life had laid upon her. From her bed, she often gazed out over the sprawling land of her new home. She reflected on all that happened, on Hazel Eyes, on betrayal, on the tower that had fallen. Gratitude began to rise, fragile, but steady. It was here that healing began, not in the mending of her foot, but in the softening of her inner world. She began to see how tightly she had bound herself to striving, to proving, to enduring. The pain had cinched around her like a corset. Loosening, it would take time. One evening, the ache inside her boiled over. Words of fury spilled from her mouth. Words forged in the heat of righteous indignation. The air around her trembled with the sound of it. And then a quiet answer came. Not in a voice, not in human form, but through the eyes of her most faithful companion. She always liked to rest at the foot of the bed, not on the floor. That was where the cat curled up. But on the soft sheepskin laid across linen sheets, her head rested on her beloved's lap, ears flicking at every sound. When the storm of words broke, the faithful one lifted her head, yawned, and gazed into the eyes of the wounded woman. Tilting her head, she offered the only answer that anger could not: stillness. Her gaze held truth, uncomplicated, unafraid, and in that gaze, the woman understood. Healing would not come through rage, but through release. So she let go. Steadying herself, she leaned against the fallen stones that had once formed the tower walls, round stones, jagged stones, long and narrow ones, pulled from the quarry by the bend of the river. These had been the foundation of her home, now scattered and reduced to rubble. She could finally admit that her insides felt much the same, shattered, uneven pieces of herself stacked on atop another, all made of the same material, all brought to ruin. Rubbing her hands along the rough surface, she swore the rock spoke its sorrow. It had suffered too, fallen out of place and belonging. She pressed her palms against it, feeling the coolness of its face. Meeting the warmth of her skin, her tears fell freely, dampening the stones until they seemed to cry with her. Mourning the injustice of what had been lost, together they grieved the woman and the stone, the living and the once strong. It was here among the ruins that she allowed herself to remember Hazel Eyes without fury, to wonder softly what had gone so wrong. The questions no longer clawed at her, they simply breathed with her as she wept. And when the tears subsided, she felt a subtle shift. The pain that had once seared her heart now ached with a gentler rhythm. Her foot, once broken, moved with steadiness, testing the earth, setting itself down as light as that of a deer. Forest floor bent beneath her heels as she glided along the worn path. Hard-pressed dirt and decaying leaves molded to her feet as she made her way through the wood. The crutches were gone. The healing was underway. Ahead lay the bend of the river where the flax field had begun to grow. From there, she could see what was left of her tower. Nature had already begun its quiet reclamation, vines crawling through the crevices, moss softening the edges of the fallen stones. As she listened to the water, some still called it living. A small seed drifted on the wind, twirling and dancing on unseen currents. It landed upon one of the stones beside a small yellow flower. She drew a deep breath, filling her lungs with gratitude. Life comes from broken things, she thought. The world was revealing its secret alchemy. How ruin can become soil. How endings can make way for beginnings. Her fallen tower, once a symbol of safety, now served as the cradle for new life. The seed carried on the breath of the wind was a messenger. It told her that nothing is ever truly lost. In her own quiet brokenness, she carried a limp, one that they said would fade with time. Perhaps it would, perhaps not. But she had learned to move differently now, to let the day lead her into exhaustion, rather than exhaustion leading the day. It was a lesson her broken foot had carved into her spirit, to move slowly, to listen, to let the ground teach her its rhythm. So she tended the flax once more. Though with slower hands, she whispered words of gratitude, gratitude for the robes and dresses they would one day become, gratitude for the water's fragrance that wove itself through her breath and body, gratitude for the healing that came not through perfection, but through presence. Each inhale felt like stitching a new story into her being, a tapestry made from all she had lost and all she had learned to love again. One early morning, resting beneath the willow near the river's edge, she sipped from her pottery cup filled with the water of life. The glaze shimmered green and turquoise in the rising light. It was then that a pair of blue eyes came into view. He walked with a purpose along the bend of the river, shoulders broad like the doorframe in her new home where she would one day rest her feet upon a chair's arm while sipping tea. His stride carried confidence, warmth, and something she could not yet name. He spoke his name, and she offered hers. They shared stories and laughter, trading questions and tears, just as she once had with Hazel Eyes. But this time, something was different. The affection she felt was immediate, but not born of need. It was alive with curiosity, electric with something she would later learn to call love. Blue eyes asked for nothing, demanded nothing. His love moved like the river, steady, open, and free. Together they pondered life's mysteries and the language of the heart. They delighted in thoughtful debate and quiet silence alike. Words flowed freely between them, a shared rhythm of understanding. Sometimes their thoughts spilled too fast to catch, tumbling over one another with laughter and light. And in that shared momentum, they fell deeply into love. He became her king, and she his queen, two souls meeting at last in the aftermath of battle, learning that love can heal what war could not. One early morning, they sat beneath the willow tree by the water's edge, sipping from that same pottery cup, when 4 children danced down the river bend, 3 with brown eyes and 1 with bright blue. And together they told their story of love and loss, of battle and brokenness, of finding a way through it all. As the years passed, the river remained their meeting place, its steady rhythm marking the seasons of their lives. The willow grew taller, its branches dipping low enough for the children to weave through its curtains and play in its shade. The flax fields thrived once more, rippling in the wind like a golden sea. She taught her children how to tend the shrubs, to harvest with gratitude, and to whisper thanks to the living water that nourished it all. Each robe, each dress they made carried the story of endurance woven into its fibers. Sometimes, as the sun slid low across the bend, she would sit beside Blue Eyes and watch their children run, their laughter echoing through the valley. She rested her head against his shoulder, her hand tracing small circles against his skin. There were still moments when she felt the ache of the past, a tremor in her foot, a dream of battle, a flash of hazel eyes in memory. But the pain no longer owned her. It lived quietly now, folded into the fabric of her being, like a seam, visible, but no longer tender to the touch. In those moments, she would whisper to the river, "Thank you for carrying me through." Because she had learned that healing is not about forgetting. It is about remembering differently. It's learning that even broken things can become sacred when we meet them with love. Her tower, once a symbol of protection and control, had become a sanctuary of surrender. Its stones now cradled life, moss, flowers, seedlings, all thriving from the same ground that had once marked her downfall. And she, too, had become something new. No longer the woman who fought to survive, but the one who chose to live. Sometimes she would watch her children chase the wind, their small feet pattering across the same earth that once held her body in battle. She'd smile, feeling the echo of her own steps, the way her foot once pressed the ground like a deer's, light but certain. And when dusk settled over the river, Blue Eyes would take her hand. Together they'd sit in silence, listening to the course of night. This was her redemption. Not victory over pain, but peace within it. For in the great turning of her life, she had come to understand the secret the world had been whispering all along. That love is the quiet companion of endurance. That grief is a teacher dressed in shadow. And that every fall holds the promise of flight. So she breathed deeply, filling her chest with the scent of flax and the hum of water, and whispered one final prayer into the wind. May all that has been broken bloom again. May all who have fallen rise renewed. May we remember that even upside down can still be its own kind of right side up. So maybe you listen to this story, her battle, her breaking, her return. Something inside you feels familiar. Maybe you too have known what it's like to rebuild from the rubble, to walk with a limp, to find beauty growing out of what once felt broken. And if the story stirs something inside of you, maybe you can take a moment with it and let the words settle. And if it feels right, and only if it feels right, here are a few questions you might sit with. And sit, not try to fix or figure it out, but in this place, gently explore. 4 questions you can choose to reflect. Where in my own life have the towers fallen? And what might be quietly growing in their place? What part of me is still learning to heal at its own pace, even when I wish it would hurry? Is there something I've been judging in myself that's really just asking for gentleness? And what would it look like if I began to see my upside down, not as wrong, but simply another way of being right side up? Take a breath with that. Maybe jot a word down or a feeling or a color or, just sit in the quiet and listen. Because sometimes it's in the stillness, not the answers, that healing begins to speak. Thank you for listening to The Upside Down. Let those questions ripple through you. Let them find their way downstream. Maybe you feel you need to breathe more. Maybe you need to enter into silence more to ponder. If you'd like to explore more reflections and creative writings like this, you can find them at laurieclarkemedia.com, or join me here again most Fridays for more stories from the Upside Down, where loss and love trade places and meaning begins to grow in the cracks.